everybody, this is Laura from Paint and Play RVA. This is the tutorial for the resin wooden serving tray. What you have in your kit is going to be 4 to 5 mica powders. They're in the little bags. I've emptied my mica powders into my little Dixie cup. Some of you chose glitter. I've emptied my glitter into the bottom of one of my Dixie cups. We have 2 clear containers, one marked with an H, one marked with an R. That is your resin. I haven't painted this tray. Some of you chose to go natural. Some of you chose paint. If you chose paint, usually what I do is I just paint the outside here, and then the inside rim. You can definitely paint the bottom if you want. I don't usually paint the bottom of my trays. You can paint the inside bottom, but it's not really going to make a difference. Most of your all of your resins are going to be colored, so it's just a matter of preference. But I don't usually paint the bottom. I feel like it's kind of a waste because you're going to pour colored resin over it. If you do paint the bottom of this, make sure your paint is super thin and you really give it a chance to dry, because we don't want to interfere with the resin curing. So if you've painted this and you've gotten a little bit of paint on here, it's totally fine. Don't wipe it with alcohol or water. Just either paint the whole bottom or you can leave it. It's not going to make a difference. Like I said, if you get a little bit of paint here on the bottom while you're painting the inside edges, just leave it. Your resin's going to cover it up anyway. Forgive me if I'm speaking quick. I'm always trying to get through these pretty fast just to make sure, because I'm newer to making these tutorials. I've had my phone shut off mid-tutorial before, so that's why I'm speaking fairly quick. If you do have any questions, 804-424-1342, you can text me, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. I usually, depending on the time of the day, usually can get back to you within the hour. But forgive me if it takes me a little bit longer. Sometimes I'm a full part-time teacher nowadays with my daughters at home. So anyway, let's get going. This is your cup that you are going to mix your resin into. I'm going to work on top of my tray just so that you can see. One thing to keep in mind is you want to make your tray in a location that you can keep it overnight. That's not going to be disturbed by any children, animals, or maybe adults. I don't know. I use just a garbage bag underneath my surface. I like to use Dixie cups or any cups to keep my tray risen off the surface. I also, most of the time you're not going to run into any problems, but sometimes sometimes the resin will leak. It's usually tightly sealed, but sometimes you'll get a little bit of a leakage underneath. So that's also a good reason not to lay your tray directly on the plastic surface. So use some cups to raise it off like this. Have all of your powders prepared before you start mixing. Put them all in these little cups before you start mixing. Because once we mix, we want to have all the time that we can to work with the resin. So 50-50 mix. I like to pour it into my cup at the same time. That way one is not going to be at the bottom, and it kind of creates some mixing as you pour it in. The thicker one is going to be your actual epoxy. The thinner one is going to be the hardener. That's what causes the chemical process for it to start to harden. So we are not going to whip it. We just stir it slowly. And it's really important that you scrape the edges and you also agitate the bottom of the cup. I say 3 minutes on my tutorials. I don't stir for 3 minutes because I don't want you to have to sit here and watch me stir for 3 minutes. So stir it until for 3 minutes, or you see no more striations in the resin. So I'm just going to give it a couple more stirs. If you see bubbles, don't worry about it. You're going to go ahead and mix it with the mica, and then if you do see bubbles at the end, typically people use a blowtorch to get rid of the bubbles. But I know most of us don't have a blowtorch laying around, so you can just use a straw. If you see a bubble that you just can't stand and it's going to bother you, you can just use a straw to concentrate the air and blow on top of the bubble. That's a little trick that I learned. But the bubbles are not going to, it's not going to ruin your tray. When you're pouring into your mica cups, start smaller, and if you have more, you can go back. I say start smaller because I just want to make sure that you have enough in the end to get to that 4th or 5th cup, because it's really easy to over pour into the other cups and then you don't have enough resin for that last cup. So make sure you scrape every last bit into the cups. Really important with this that we do not over mix or over agitate. If you over mix or over agitate, it'll start to heat up and harden really quick. So really scrape the bottom to get the mica up off of it and distributed, but 10 to 15 stirs, light stirs, not whipping it. Whipping is not good in this situation. So this one I have a little bit more mica powder in, which is okay. If you ever work with mica powder in the future, whether it's one of my kits or you're experimenting at home, the amount of mica powder is really not going to interfere, and you don't need a ton. There's just a small amount in the bottom and it colors it thoroughly. You don't need a ton of mica powder. In fact, if you use too much mica powder, you'll notice that your resin will kind of lose its viscosity. It'll harden up and get really, really thick. It's kind of like if you put too much flour in a batter or something like that. So keep that in mind if you ever make a kit at home, or make another. Well, most of my kits are measured out for you, but so some of them, if you missed some of the powder, it'll float to the top and make little circles. So you just go ahead, go back, give everyone another little stir. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is pour. You can pour any way that you want. I'm just going to show you what I consider a clean pour with resin. I pinch these to give me a little spout. And I'm just going to start piling up my resin on top of each other. So there's no exact science to this. You really can't mess this up. You notice some of my pores are larger, some of them are smaller. There's not necessarily a particular order that I'm pouring in. It's not a technique that you're going to have a ton of control over. You know, a lot of times people will ask me, if I put more of this, will it show up more? If I put this on top, will it show up more? No, probably not. I think that's kind of the fun of it anyway, because, you know, you're picking your colors, but, you know, at the end, you don't have a ton of control over what the end result is, but I think it's kind of fun. I'm going to go back to my brown. But definitely keep in mind, once you've mixed that resin, especially with that, I mean, not even just with the mica powder, once you've mixed that resin, it definitely starts to get thicker and thicker as it sets. It's not going to harden right away, but you'll definitely want to get your resin down as soon as possible, because as you see, it doesn't roll. It's pretty thick. It's like a molasses, so it's not going to roll across the surface. So what we're going to have to do is make it roll by tilting and manipulating the tray. So with the side of my popsicle stick, I'm going to run it through the piles of paint that I poured. Not the thick side, you don't want to plow it, you just kind of want a thin. That's really important because you want to get that marbling effect, and if you don't do it, it'll just be blobs that just slide across. All right, so now what we do is the second it hits the side, then I tilt it like this. Once it hits that bottom side, I'm going to tilt it like that. So you're constantly rotating and rotating and rotating. And when it hits that bottom side, you're going to turn it again. So you see there, I'm hitting the edge, so then I'm going to turn it this way. Something to keep in mind if you're doing this with your kids, the resin's not going to hurt. It doesn't have a very strong fumes. Just keep in mind that it is extremely sticky. It is hard to get out of any, and it's hard to get off of any surface, really. It's just basically liquid plastic. So always wear gloves when you're using it. because mostly because if you get it on your hands, it's really hard to get off. You have to use alcohol. You could use hand sanitizer or just straight alcohol, but that's what you need to break down the resin off of your hands. It's like a sap. So keep that in mind. You know, it's totally fine, and I encourage, you know, if you would like your children, or if you have children, to, you know, allow them to partake in some of this. Probably, if they're younger, not the actual resin mixing portion, because you really don't want to mess that portion up. If you don't mix the resin efficiently, you'll end up having spots on your tray that do not cure. And they'll be tacky. You'll end up with some tacky areas. So you don't want that to happen. So once you get a large majority of it covered, then you can move it around a little bit and play with it, manipulate it a little bit more. Now, if you have little spots like these where it's not covered, you can just take your popsicle stick and just kind of create a kind of like a channel to encourage the resin to go over it. Now, as you can see, all of the same colors, all of the same proportions for the most part, and in this tray, the green really showed through the most. So that's an example of you know, not really having a ton of control over the outcome of your tray or what the resin does. I'm just rolling it this way to try to get a little bit more of that navy blue. You also can, I've made this kind of messy. I'm moving pretty quick here. So I've gotten some resin on it. You can sand off any resin later after it cures, or you can just paint over any of the resin that gets on there. So you could do a little bit of paint, or you can just wait to put your paint on after. I like painting it before, but you can always paint it after if you want. Or just be more careful. I used gloves that had a bunch of mica powder on them, so just be careful when you're handling the tray. But don't, excuse me, do not put any alcohol on any portion of your tray, because alcohol, like I said, breaks down resin, and it'll interfere with the curing. If you noticed, I omitted my glitter from my initial pour. I only did that because if you put the glitter in first, you don't have as much control over where the glitter is on your tray, and I think it's kind of fun to see, look, I'm being super messy, to have more defined lines with your glitter. So just kind of going, and I try to run it along where the colors meet. You can't really tell with the lighting, but it just that makes me like glitter. Who doesn't like glitter? I would say if somebody doesn't like glitter, don't trust them. So, let me see. It's super glittery. It's kind of tough to see. So, I used all of the glitter. Keep in mind that like that was an equal portion of glitter resin to everything else. Now you can leave it the way it is, or you can kind of play around with it at this point. Resin is self-leveling, so you have a while to kind of play around with it and disturb it. Like if you don't want like really rigid edges, I'll go in and kind of whisk it out like that. You can see. So you can play around with it as much as you want. So let it dry overnight. Usually they say 2 days is to fully cure. And then if you need to, you can sand anything down. Just be aware of your gloves and the mica powder on them. But like I said, any portion that gets resin on it, you can just use, a cloth or, a dry sponge to get any portion off that you got on the tray. But I think most of you chose like a kind of like a darker color anyway. But if you're doing like a white paint or a really light paint, then I would maybe go ahead and paint it last, just because the white is not as forgiving as say like a dark brown or like a gold or a dark silver. So that's the tutorial for the resin wooden tray. I'd like to thank you so much for purchasing the kit, and I hope that this kind of brings a little bit of joy into your home during these hard times. I really appreciate your purchase. It's helping me keep my business afloat while I'm not able to hold these classes. So thank you so much. Again, reach out if you need any help or guidance, and stay safe.